So, what is the range of felony charges that Special Prosecutor Jack Smith is going to bring against Donald Trump and his half smart cronies working out of the Oval Office between Election Day 2020 and January 6th and beyond, relative to their efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election? That's what we're going to discuss tonight. There is a website, I think it's called justsecurity.org. They published today a model prosecution memo. I think it's like 265 pages long, laying out the potential charges for Donald Trump and his co-conspirators relative to their efforts to overturn the election results of 2020, which culminated in the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th, 2021, and all the violence that went along with that we all watched on live television. So let's break this down a bit. I believe that there are 4 more sets of indictments coming against Donald Trump and his cohorts. One, between July 31st and August 18th, we're going to see Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis's indictments coming out of Georgia for Trump's efforts to overturn the election results in the state of Georgia. That's going to be a conspiracy case. It's going to involve anywhere from 10 to 15 people, possibly even Lindsey Graham, who also made a phone call to Brad Raffensperger in addition to Donald Trump's phone call to Brad Raffensperger. I only need 11,780 votes, which was one more than we need, blah, 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 blah. We've all heard that. Then I believe before that, so before July 31st, I believe that Jack Smith is going to issue his indictments against Donald Trump and his cohorts for their efforts to overturn the 2020 election, because federal prosecutors like to go before state prosecutors. It gives them priority. Jack Smith has also got in his back pocket 2 more indictments for Donald Trump. One for all of his fraudulent fundraising efforts between Election Day 2020, even before, and January 6th and beyond for his legal defense fund, which was bullshit. I mean, come on. That's going to be a wide-ranging conspiracy case as well, because every single fundraising email that Trump and his campaign sent out during that period of time is a separate count of fraud and wire fraud and deception and all kinds of other things. And the last one, and I talked about this in the video that I did for the indictment that Jack Smith issued for Donald Trump relative to the documents case out of Mar-a-Lago. There were 2 paragraphs in that indictment where Donald Trump was showing classified information, classified documents, to people who did not have clearance to see that information or those documents. But both of those incidents took place at Bedminster Golf Resort in New Jersey. I guarantee you that Jack Smith has many, many, many more documented incidents of Donald Trump showing classified documents and classified information to people who did not have the security clearance to see that information or those documents than just those 2 events. So 4 more sets of indictments are coming. So tonight, let's just talk about Jack Smith and January 6th and Donald Trump and his little friends' efforts to overturn the 2020 election, the conspiracies that they were running out of the White House. Who are the people who are potentially also going to be criminally indicted with multiple felonies relative to those efforts? His former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, Stephen Miller, attorney John Eastman, Attorney Jeffrey Clark from the DOJ, Rudy Giuliani, General Michael Flynn, Release the Kraken, Sidney Powell, Jenna Ellis. Kenneth Chesebro was another attorney working out of the White House who was working on the fake electors. Rona Romney McDaniels, RNC chair, she was neck deep in this crap. Steve Bannon, Roger Stone, Ginny Thomas, Pennsylvania Congressman Scott Perry, Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan, Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs, former New York City Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik, who was very close to Giuliani, and any number of the 34 elected Republican members of Congress who were texting back and forth with his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, in the days leading up to January 6th, making various suggestions about how they could overturn the election results or impose martial law or do this or that. All of that stuff is on the table, and all of those people are on the table. Now, for additional context, and Ari Melber on MSNBC did an amazing job of putting together a kind of a time chart from election day 2020 through January of 2021 of the 8 different conspiracies that Donald Trump and his co-conspirators were running out of the Oval Office during that 2 to 3 month period, 2.5 month period between Election Day and Inauguration Day, using the full weight of the presidency, the full weight of the executive branch, the DOJ, the military, the Pentagon. It's mind-blowing. I mean, it all started off on election night 2020, November 3rd, I think, when Trump came out and said, frankly, we did win this election, at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever. Right out of the gate, and you can watch my video one or two before this one. I just did a whole video breaking down the Washington, D.C. Bar Association complaint against Rudy Giuliani relative to these efforts. That's when Rudy Giuliani, like right out of the gate, started filing his 60 plus lawsuits. He lost all but one of them, and the one that he did win had nothing to do with anything. And also right out of the gate with attorney Kenneth Chesebro and attorney John Eastman, they immediately started with the fake elector scheme, such that in 7 or 8 states on, I believe it was December 14th, in 7 states all across the country, there were these groups of fake Republican electors who got together and held these little official meetings to say, oh, we're the real electors. And then there were several fronts where Trump was calling Brad Raffensperger in Georgia. He was calling Governor Doug Ducey in Arizona to try to get individual states to overturn their own election results so that they would flip from a Biden victory to a Trump victory. And when all of that stuff was kind of petering out a little bit, we get into December, and then Trump and Meadows and other congressional Republicans were putting a tremendous amount of pressure on other members of Congress to simply reject the valid, legal elector votes and get Congress to overturn those. There was a pressure campaign on Mike Pence to overturn the electoral votes. And then there was a campaign using DOJ attorney Jeffrey Clark, who's just this nebbishy little bald guy with glasses, kind of nerdy looking. He was an environmental attorney for the Department of Justice, Trump wanted to fire the acting attorney general because Bill Barr had resigned and no new attorney general had been confirmed by Congress. I think the guy in place at that time, his name was Donahue. Trump wanted to fire Donahue and replace him with Jeffrey Clark because Jeffrey Clark was on board with sending, these letters to various states saying you can't certify your electoral votes. There was a brief period of time with, Sidney Powell, Mike Flynn, Rudy Giuliani, and the dude who was the former CEO of Overstock.com, where they were trying to convince Trump to impose martial law and get the military to seize voting machines. Whatever. That didn't last very long. And then Trump's very, very last resort was the insurrection. Violence at the Capitol on January 6th. All of these various different conspiracies, as shown right here, I'll hold that up to the camera. That's the chart that Ari Melber put out. You can screenshot that if you want to save it. There were like 8 different conspiracies. They were running out of the frickin' White House to try to overturn the election results. So, with that context, and then we had the whole January 6th committee during the first 2 years of the Biden administration because Democrats took control of the House. Thank God. And that committee did just unimaginably good work. And the work that committee did, combined with the grand jury activity that was going on in Georgia, in Fulton County, with Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. I mean, that committee and Fani Willis got a more than 1 year long jump on the Department of Justice and Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland wouldn't have done anything about any of this executive level stuff apart from prosecuting people who actually went into the Capitol on January 6th, but for those 2 things, the January 6th committee and Fani Willis in Georgia. They very publicly, not intentionally, but it had this effect, they very publicly shamed Merrick Garland into eventually beginning an investigation into Trump and his cohorts, which resulted in the appointment of Special Prosecutor Jack Smith in mid-November 2022, I believe. Much less than a year ago, about 8 months ago. And also bear in mind that in the days leading up to January 6th, Trump, through Mark Meadows, was running a January 6th war room in the Willard Hotel, which was across the street from the White House, where Mark Meadows, Stephen Miller, John Eastman, Steve Bannon, Roger Stone, and Bernard Kerik were coordinating what was going to happen on January 6th. And the day before the insurrection, on his podcast, remember that Steve Bannon went on and he was like, tomorrow's not going to go the way you think it's going to go. It is going to be dramatically different than anything you can possibly imagine. He stopped just short of saying Trump is going to send these lunatics into the Capitol on purpose, inside the building. He stopped just short of saying that. Now, this charging document, which I already wrote all over it, but whatever. I didn't print out the whole 265 pages, but I've got enough to make a 30-minute video. So here we go. Buckle up, kids. This one's going to get saucy. They go through the facts. They go through the application of law to the facts. They make a conclusion. They break the entire thing, the whole universe, these attorneys who are former federal prosecutors, former federal defense attorneys, academics, very, 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 very well respected attorneys, they break it down into three parts, kind of three acts. Act one, Trump's rejection of the truth, and he's embracing these schemes to keep him in office even though he lost. Act two, even though he knew he lost. Act two is pressuring Vice President Pence to refuse to count the electoral votes. Act three, the insurrection, violence. Summoning a violent mob, doing nothing to disperse it or prevent it or minimize it, and intentionally targeting Mike Pence, knowing that there was a violent mob at the Capitol who was armed. And you know, it's like talking about this stuff every now and then. I got to take a minute, man. I was working from home that day. I watched it all happen live on television. It was one of the most horrifying things that I've ever seen in my life as it relates to the United States of America and, you know, the idea or the concept of democracy and elections in the United States of America. None of us have ever seen anything like this before. Nothing like this has ever happened before. It was and is, I think, traumatic for a lot of us. I think it was very traumatic. I mean, I mentioned this in my last video. It's like I had a Zoom court hearing at 3 p.m. West Coast time that day, which was 6 p.m. East Coast time, which was when all of these Gomer chuckleheads were finally leaving the Capitol. And I got on the Zoom call, and the other attorney was on the Zoom call, and the judge comes on, and we were all obviously aware of what had just happened. And I was just like, we're gonna go ahead and have this hearing on whether or not we're going to continue a trial date. And the judge was like, yeah, we are, because life goes on and we have stuff to do. And part of me was like, well, you know, you got to have some respect for that. But obviously it was still a bit too raw for me, the events of the day, for me to just talk about continuing a trial date in a civil case like nothing had happened. Whatever. That's, as we say in the legal world, that's neither here nor there. All right, I'm going to take these pages and set those aside because I'm going to come back to them. So I'm going to talk about, we're going to go through the introduction and talk about those three acts that I mentioned. And then I'm going to get to the potential crimes towards the end. So, okay. They talk about why they did this memo and how they did this memo and how this memo comports with all of their experience having worked in the Department of Justice for many years, and that they typically do this kind of a memo as an internal document that doesn't get released to the public when they're prosecuting a big case like this. But because they've all worked in the Department of Justice, they've all done these kinds of memos before, they got together, they drafted this one and released it to the public so the public has some kind of idea of what the Department of Justice is doing and working on right now. Because I believe that 2 weeks from today, wait, hang on, what's today? July 13th, Thursday. I believe within 2.5 weeks from today, we're going to have Jack Smith's indictment, which is going to cover 15 people, 20 people, including Trump, relative to Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Those indictments are going to be massive because Jack Smith issues what we call speaking indictments or talking if you read his indictment for the Mar-a-Lago documents case, it it reads like a story. It tells a story. Prosecutors don't have to do that. Jack Smith understands that what this case is and the issues and the people that are involved, he's got to tell the story with the initial document. And that's what he's going to do. That's what he did with the Mar-a-Lago case. So again, it's like they break it down. They start off again by further kind of fleshing out this like 3-act play. Number one, Trump knew he lost the election but did not want to give up power. Period. That's the foundation for the whole damn thing. That sentence right there. Trump knew he lost the election but did not want to give up power. That, combined with the fact that Trump losing to Joe Biden, who, according to the right, had never left his basement during the entire 2020 campaign, it caused this malignant, narcissistic sociopath, Donald Trump, to suffer such a severe psychic and emotional injury that he could not handle it. He had a narcissistic breakdown and was just like, I didn't lose. I didn't lose to this guy. This election was stolen, period. I couldn't have lost to this guy. Therefore, the only other option is that the election was stolen and the Democrats and Joe Biden cheated. And fortunately for him, not for the rest of us, fortunately for Donald Trump, you know, he's got 50 or 60 million followers in this country who are dumb, gullible, loud, mean, easily manipulated, and very easily separated from their money, who bought that line 100%, man. They swallowed that hook and they were 100% on board. The election was stolen, the Dems cheated, period. And then we end up with crap like Dinesh D'Souza's movie 2000 Mules. And they're like, see, he proved it. That funny looking guy proved it. And it's like, really? Dude, come on, man. And so that's Act One. Trump knew he lost the election but did not want to give up power. So we get Giuliani's lawsuits. That's the first step. So he worked with his lawyers and others on a wide variety of schemes to change the outcome, to overturn the results of a free, fair, and legal election. Act Two. When all of those schemes failed, Trump and his lawyers ultimately concentrated on using the false electoral slates to obstruct the constitutionally mandated congressional certification of the election on January 6th. The fake electors. That started right out of the gate, too, with John Eastman. John Eastman started off with the fake electors. Rudy Giuliani started off with his BS lawsuits. And so the primary objective with regard to the fake electors was Mike Pence. To give Mike Pence an option on January 6th. And they wanted to convince Mike Pence, well, from these 7 states, 5 of which were swing states that flipped the election, that turned the election to Joe Biden and gave him a victory. If you reject the actual slates of electors from those states and either accept these fake electors or say, well, we have conflicting slates of electors, so we have to send it back to the states or send it back to Congress. And if you send it back to Congress, each state gets one vote. Well, 26 states in Congress had Republican majority representation. 24 of them had majority Democratic representation. So it would have been 26 to 24 in favor of Trump, and Trump would be our president if Mike Pence had gone along with that. Act 3, when Pence refused, Trump went to his last resort, inviting a mob of relatively successful white people in their mid-50s who live in the suburbs all across America, especially from places like Texas and Florida and California, to come to Washington, D.C. for January 6th and storm the Capitol, committing violence, trash the place, and smear their own fecal matter on the wall, because what screams patriotism and founding fathers more than that? Wiping your day old Chipotle on the fucking halls of Congress. And hoping that that violence at the Capitol would either convince Mike Pence to do the right thing or would just shut down the congressional proceeding of counting the electoral ballots on January 6th. That's the three-part structure. Now, the conclusions that these folks come to in this memo, they say our own conclusions based upon publicly available information are bolstered by the analysis of many other authority figures in the United States. One, a federal judge, I think it was in California, has already adjudicated in an opinion found by a preponderance of the evidence that Trump and a co-conspirator, John Eastman, likely violated two U.S. Code sections, which were felonies, which related to kind of crime fraud exception stuff for attorney-client privilege, as well as fake electors and some other dishonest stuff that they were doing. They also rely on the fact that the January 6th committee made criminal referrals of Trump and his co-conspirators to the Department of Justice, and under those and other statutes, additional statutes, based upon voluminous and persuasive evidence summarized and cited in their report. Their report. It's very thick. So let's talk about that for a second. The criminal referrals of the January 6th committee. The committee made a few criminal referrals, but they also made basically 17 findings of fact, which they presented in their report, which support the criminal referrals that they made. What are those 17 findings? Trump pushed false allegations of election fraud. Duh. Trump refused to accept the lawful result of the 2020 election, even after losing dozens of lawsuits, and he then plotted to overturn the results of the 2020 election. 3, Trump knew his actions were illegal, as did John Eastman, as did Kenneth Chesebro, an attorney, as did Jeffrey Clark, another attorney, as did Mark Meadows, because White House counsel Pat Cipollone and his deputy met with Giuliani and Trump and all of these other people on multiple occasions and said, what you are doing is illegal. It is illegal, it is unconstitutional. So they had noticed that it was illegal. They had noticed ahead of time that it was unconstitutional. And he knew also that it was illegal to pressure Pence to refuse to count electoral votes. 4, Trump urged the Department of Justice officials to make purposely false statements regarding the 2020 election to overturn its results. He tried to get acting Attorney General Donahue to do this. And that guy was like, what? Have you lost your mind? And that's when he brings in Jeffrey Clark to try to get Jeffrey Clark to take over the Department of Justice, because Jeffrey Clark was like, I'm on board. Yeah, let's do this thing. And that didn't work, because everybody was going to quit. 5, Trump unlawfully pressured state officials and legislatures to overturn their election. He did this in Georgia. He did it in Arizona. Those are the 2 we know about right now. I will be very surprised if there are not other states that we learn about eventually in that same regard. Number 6, Trump oversaw an effort to obtain and transmit false electoral certificates to Congress and to the National Archives. That's the fake electors thing. That was being run out of the Oval Office. It was being driven by John Eastman, with Trump's encouragement and consent, and was being coordinated by Mark Meadows and Kenneth Chesebro, among others. 7. Trump pressured members of Congress to object to valid slates of electors from several states. I mean, this is your Jim Jordan, your Andy Biggs, your Mike Lee, all of these Republican members of Congress. I mean, there were like 170 or 180 of them in the House and the Senate, who even after the violence at the Capitol, still Ted Cruz, still voted objecting to valid legal electoral slates from at least a half a dozen states, even after the violence took place at the Capitol. I so hope that there's some form of retribution for these people. I can't even tell you. 8. Trump purposely verified false information filed in federal court. That's the reason why Rudy Giuliani is getting disbarred by the DC Bar Association. He filed fake lawsuits. He knew they were fake. He knew there were no facts in support of them. He knew he had no valid, reasonable legal arguments to make in support of what he was trying to get the court to do. He knew what he was doing was illegal, and Trump was involved in every step of that. 9. Trump summoned his supporters to Washington based on false allegations. The election was stolen. December 19th at 2 a.m., he put out a tweet that said, huge protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there. Will be wild. And boy, was it. And that's when he put that tweet out, December 18th or 19th, that's when all of Giuliani's lawsuits had failed. All of these fake hearings across the states that Giuliani was doing had gone nowhere, including his press conference where the stuff was coming down, his hair dye was coming down the side of his face. That didn't work. The one hearing, I think it was in Michigan, where he leaned over and he farted on his co-counsel, Jenna Ellison, enveloping her in a cloud of God knows what. That didn't work. That was after Saturday, November 7th, when the election was called for Joe Biden in the middle of Rudy Giuliani's press conference at Four Seasons Landscaping next to the adult bookstore down the street from the crematorium. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I would be hard pressed to come up with this as fiction. It's just crazy. Item 10. So all of that stuff fails. Trump summons the mob to come to DC on January 6th, and they showed up. They showed up with bells on because, as I said earlier, the dumb, gullible, loud, mean, easily manipulated, easily separated from their own money. Let's go buy some more flags, t-shirts, and hats. That crowd, they believed it 100%. They believed it 100%. 100%. They bought the entire thing. And so then we get January 6th, and Trump gives his speech. We're going to walk down to the Capitol. You got to fight like hell. If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country. I hope Mike Pence does the right thing. His supporters go down to the Capitol and start smashing windows and breaking doors, and they go inside the Capitol. Item 10, Trump targeted Pence on Twitter while the Capitol attack was underway. So it was, I don't know, I can't remember the exact timeline, like 1:45 or something, 2 p.m. When, that Dominic Pizzola guy with the police shield first smashes through the first window and the first people go inside the Capitol. Proud Boy. And by then, it was very, very clear that Mike Pence was not going to do what Donald Trump wanted him to do. And so at 2:24 p.m., he puts out the tweet targeting Mike Pence, knowing that Mike Pence is at the Capitol, knowing that his supporters had showed up to his speech earlier that day armed, because tens of thousands of them wouldn't come through the metal detectors. And he tried to get rid of the metal detectors. We heard about that from the January 6th committee. Dozens of them had guns. And they went to the Capitol. They were inside the Capitol. They were trashing the place, smashing windows. Trump knew they were inside the Capitol because he was watching the coverage from his little dining room off the Oval Office. He knew that Mike Pence was inside the Capitol, and he put out a tweet targeting Mike Pence, and then people immediately started chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," inside the Capitol. 11, Trump refused to call off his violent supporters. He watched it for 187 minutes, over 3 hours. He just watched it, and he gleefully recounted to other people in the West Wing, you see how they're fighting for me? Look how they're fighting for me. Isn't this amazing how they're fighting for me? This is incredible. Look how they're fighting for me. 12, each of these actions by Trump was taken in support of a multi-part conspiracy to overturn the lawful results of the 2020 election. I mean, the guy's not a quitter. I'll give him that, I guess. I mean, okay. 13, authorities had briefed the executive branch on the potential for violence at the Capitol. Did they, though? Nobody told Pence's Secret Service team. They were hiding in a garage. 14, here's my favorite finding. Members of the Antifa movement were not involved to any material extent in the January 6th attack. It's just amusing to me that they had to put that in writing. 15, authorities had no intelligence that Trump and his allies would try to overturn the certified election results. They had all been talking about doing exactly this since before Election Day 2020. 16, Capitol Police leadership did not have sufficient assets to handle an attack like January 6th. They sure as hell had them in June of 2020 when the Black Lives Matter protests were going on in Washington, D.C. They sure as hell had sufficient assets during that protest when they had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cops head to toe in riot gear on horseback surrounding federal buildings to keep those people out. They had sufficient assets to protect the Capitol and every other building in Washington, D.C. when the people who were protesting didn't look like them. 17, Trump never ordered or deployed the National Guard. Sure, accurate. Which as we all know, that part was actually Nancy Pelosi's fault. I mean, I read that somewhere. So the criminal referrals that the January 6th committee made: obstruction of an official proceeding, felony; conspiracy to defraud the United States, felony; conspiracy to make a false statement, felony; conspiracy to incite, assist, or aid in insurrection, felony; other conspiracy statutes. Then a bunch of the Republican members of Congress were referred to the Ethics Committee, including Jim Jordan, Andy Biggs, Scott Perry, a bunch of other folks. And that of course went nowhere because Republicans took control of the House of Representatives in the 2022 election. All right, so let's get back to the prosecution memo here. I can skip that stuff there. Okay, so their conclusion in this first section, they go through a couple other things. The Department of Justice, Jack Smith, is likely now or shortly will be internally circulating this kind of a prosecution memo of its own, assessing possible 2020 election interference charges against Trump and his co-conspirators. I'm not exactly sure what information people have gotten, other than that we know Fani Willis's timeline of somewhere between July 31st and August 18th. Her indictments combined with Jack Smith wants to go first. That gives him like a 2.5 week long window. I don't know if anybody has any inside information beyond that, But several legal commentators and former DOJ people who I trust and follow and watch, I've seen like 5 or 6 of them today, basically just asserting that Jack Smith's indictments for interference with the 2020 election results are coming at some point within the next 11 business days. So before July 31st. And man, I am here for it. Let me tell you. I'm very, very much looking forward to this. So one point that they made that I thought was interesting, especially, so today's Thursday, the 13th of July. I saw a bunch of reporting today saying that prosecutors are now grilling witnesses, including Jared Kushner and some other folks, trying to pin down whether or not Trump had actually acknowledged to other people between Election Day and January 6th, whether he had admitted out loud that he had actually lost the 2020 election. And I was like, well, what's that matter? You're still not allowed to have an insurrection and bring, 8 slates of fake electors to January 6th. And I was very happy to see that the attorneys in this memo confirmed my thought. It doesn't matter whether he accepted it or not. It makes the case a little stronger if they have witnesses that's like, yeah, he knew he lost. He told me that a dozen times. It makes the case a little stronger, but it's not necessary. It's not a necessary prong for any of the actual criminal elements or offenses that are going to be charged. Okay, so then they go through the 3 things again. I don't need to cover that. Let's get to... Yeah, so just kind of winding down that day on January 6th. It was 4:17 p.m. East Coast time when Donald Trump finally posted a video asking his supporters to go home, telling them, we love you, you're very special, I know how you feel, but go home and go home in peace. And so then it was a couple hours after that Congress finally reconvened and the Senate reconvened, and they finished the process of certifying the electoral votes. And at 3:42 a.m. the next morning, overnight, Pence certified that Biden was the winner of the election. And again, man, it's just like, I remember that. I remember all of that. It was traumatic and terrible and awful. All right, so let's talk about potential charges. This memo focuses on 3. One is the conspiracy to submit fabricated electoral slates to Congress. Okay, so there are fraud elements to this. There are intent elements to this. There's the intent to make a false statement, knowingly and willfully knowing that the document that is being submitted is false. And one of the things that I like about this document, and again, you can find it on justsecurity.org, Trump on Trial, a model prosecution memo for federal election interference crimes. Attached in the appendices to this document, are all of the slates of fake electors. They included all of them. From Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, New Mexico, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. All of the signed, certified documents of fake electors are attached to this report, and it's outstanding to just be able to see these things. It's really cool. So knowingly and willfully submitted these false documents. The efforts to get these fake electors in 7 or 8 states was being run out of the Oval Office by Trump, John Eastman, and Mark Meadows. They were coordinating with people in 7 or 8 different states all across the country. Every one of them knew it was illegal. And they were doing that. It was a conspiracy that they were doing this to defraud the United States and try to unlawfully overturn the election by submitting these fraudulent electors. And Trump and his allies knew that Trump had lost a secure, legal, and fair election. It's just mind-blowing. Just the audacity. The audacity of the whole damn thing. So criminal charge number 2. I'm going to try to wrap this up in a few minutes here. Obstruct the counting of presidential electors on January 6th. So first you got the fake electors, like count the fake electors, and then if they won't count the fake electors, then he wanted all of these Republican congressmen to say, we object, we object, we object, and wanted Pence to say, well, I got to send it back to the House or send it back to the states for the states to do whatever, hold new elections. I don't know. And the third part, and I did a TikTok on this earlier. It's like one of my favorite things from folks on the right over the last 2 years with all of these insurrection cases, where all the people who went inside the Capitol, they're all getting charged, and you know, everybody on the right was like, oh yeah, well, how many got charged with insurrection? Well, we came close, you know, with the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, because a bunch of them got convicted of sedition. But relative to now, we're going to be able to answer that question from these folks. Oh, well, who got charged with insurrection? We're going to be able to answer that question with, well, let me look here. Donald Trump. Donald Trump's indicted for insurrection because this group of attorneys think that Jack Smith is going to include felony counts for 18 USC 2383, insurrection or giving aid and comfort to insurrectionists. Trump incited the insurrection. Pardon me, Freudian slip. Trump engaged in the insurrection, assisted and provided aid to the insurrectionists. He incited it. He told them to be there. He got them to come. He gave a speech to them in the morning. It's like, we're going to go to the Capitol. We're going to fight like hell. I'm going to march with you. Okay. And Trump incited the assembled mob to insurrection at his rally that morning. And so it's fake electors, disrupt the congressional proceedings, insurrection and violence in the Capitol. Those are the 3 potential charges. I think that there could be, you know, a half a dozen more charges in there about fraud, misrepresentation, things along those lines. I mean, hell, you know, relative to the people who died on or shortly after January 6th, I think 5 people died that day or the day after, and there were 3 or 4 other police officers who took their own lives. I think Trump and every one of these clowns should be charged with freaking manslaughter, frankly, but that's just me. So, you know, then they do something interesting. They talk about what are Trump's potential defenses. And this, you know, because a lot of members of Congress are squawking about their First Amendment rights. You don't have First Amendment protection for speech that is integral to a criminal act or criminal conduct. You don't have First Amendment protection for that any more than you have attorney-client privilege when you're engaging in a crime or fraud with your attorney. Excuse me. Trump does not have absolute immunity for his conduct or his words as president. Presidents generally do have immunity for their words and their actions in the legitimate execution of their duties as president. And what Trump did relative to January 6th and trying to overturn the election are not legitimate duties of any president in the United States, period. There's no analysis in favor of that. Prosecuting Trump would not violate the constitutional prerogatives of the presidency. Okay, so remember that after Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton, the DOJ adopted a policy that sitting presidents cannot be indicted or prosecuted. That is not the law. That is not in the Constitution. That's not codified anywhere. That's just two memos that people at the Department of Justice wrote and said, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do that. So they've just never done it. Because if those two memos weren't there, Robert Mueller would have prosecuted Donald Trump on at least 6 or 7 counts of obstruction. Yeah, that's a dumb defense. That's a dumb defense. Advice of counsel is no defense. So Trump is going to, one of the defenses he's going to raise is he was like, I was just following the advice of my attorneys. John Eastman, Jeffrey Clark, Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, Kenneth Cheesebro. Cheesebro. He's going to be like, I was just following the advice of my attorneys. And they told me I could do X, Y, and Z, so I did it. Well, if your attorney tells you you can go rob a 7-Eleven and you do that, you're going to get charged with robbing a 7-Eleven. That's a dumb defense, too. The activities of his attorneys are not shielded from prosecution. So this is what we're dealing with in the disbarment proceedings for Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman that are going on right now. When can you disbar an attorney or prosecute an attorney for actions they take in their role as an attorney? When they know that what they're doing is illegal, when they know that what they're doing is unconstitutional, and when they knew or should have known that what they are doing or the advice that they are giving is not within the bounds of the law, when they are not acting in good faith. And nothing that any of these attorneys did relative to January 6th was done in good faith. All of them knew it was illegal. The January 6th committee and Jack Smith have other emails in their text messages. And we saw a lot of those emails during the January 6th committee hearings where John Eastman was like, yeah, I know this is illegal. I mean, this is really messed up. We're not allowed to do this, but let's do it anyway. I mean, that's a crime. Okay, so in conclusion, I think in 10 or 12 days from today, July 13th, we are going to have Jack Smith's indictments of at least 12 to 18 people in a massive conspiracy case, including Donald Trump, for his and others' efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Within the 2 weeks immediately following that, we are going to have Fani Willis's conspiracy indictments, potentially RICO indictments out of Fulton County in Georgia. I hope she doesn't go RICO. RICO's just going to complicate everything. She's got more than enough to work with without RICO. She does not need RICO. I hope she just keeps it simple. Multiple felonies for everybody without RICO. So we'll have Jack Smith by the end of July. We'll have Fani Willis by the middle of August. I think shortly after that, between the middle of August and Labor Day, I think that's when we're going to get Jack Smith's indictments, also conspiracy